So let's kind of talk about fusion as a behavioral reflex, because fusion is a behavior. It is not a thought itself. Fusion is a behavior that we do in response to our thoughts when we experience a thought. So if we look at this, there are many sort of automatic behaviors that you might notice, yourself doing. For example, when I got home from school as a kid, I used to go straight to the fridge, and sometimes it would be without even thinking. I would just do it, automatically. The stimulus of arriving home led to the response of going to the fridge. Probably because it was quite reinforced. A lot of the time, my mum had cooked something and there was something good in there, so that had been reinforced. Fusion is probably quite a similar thing in that when our mind is coming up with a problem, and a lot of the time that's what the mind is coming up with, a problem, and it's bringing it up to our attention, it's been reinforced in the past by either solving the problem or escaping the problem. So fusion has become a reflex behavior when difficult thoughts show up. There's an analogy of the mind, which is that the mind is a great problem-solving machine. And in order to become a great problem-solving machine, it must also become a great problem detector. And so solving problems is reinforcing. It's negative reinforcement, right? The elimination of what is bad. And so fusion has become a reflex. In other words, listening to when your mind says, "Oh, watch that's going to be a problem," and we fuse with that. We "Oh, yes, what is it? Tell me about it. Let me think about it and reflect on it." Now, that is an automatic reflex with difficult thoughts and feelings a lot of the time. Simple point that I'm just trying to express there. Now, fusion is neither good or bad. Just as the self story, the conceptualized self that we talked about before, just as that is neither good or bad in itself, fusion is neither good or bad. It can be good sometimes and bad sometimes. The question is workability. How's it working for you? If I'm out there, and I'll use Russ's example that he talks about in the interview that follows. If I'm out, and I'm on holiday and I'm relaxing at the beach, and and I start to just go into my imagination and start to reflect on things that I'm really hoping for in the new year, or just reflecting on how much the great memories that I've had of this holiday so far. That's fusion. In other words, me and my mind are becoming, intertwined. It's for me, it's working. It's value based. It is working for what I want in that time. But if I'm there and I'm fusing with other things of all the things I have to do, and that's not working for me, if that's not what I value at that time, then that type of fusion is not workable. We would say that type of fusion is something that's unhelpful to me. So in short, in summary of what we're saying so far, fusion is a reflex when difficult thoughts show up for most people. Second point is that fusion in itself is not inherently bad or good. It is all about the question of workability. In other words, the context of values. How is fusing with this particular thought helping you or hindering you in the context of what you value and what you want to do? Trying to see if we can kind of explain this. Let's use a physical metaphor here. Catching a ball. To explain fusion as a reflex, because a lot of the time clients don't really see what we mean when we say that the thought is not the problem, fusion is the problem. I have a T-shirt that says it's not the thought that counts, it's how you use it. A little bit of a play on words, and it's kind of explaining that it's not the content of the thought that's the problem. It's how we hold and use the content of that thought, whether we hold it like this or whether we can hold it like that. So the physical example here is catching a ball. So if I was in person with a client, sometimes what we do is to take a ball, and let's imagine I have a ball and I throw a ball to you. What would you do? Most likely, as you see the ball coming, you'll attempt to catch the ball. And that's the end of the example. And let me ask you, why did you catch the ball? Let's pretend we were doing this role play. Why did you catch the ball? What would you say? Maybe because you threw it to me, or because I saw it coming, I didn't want to get hit in the head. Many reasons. The point being that this has been rehearsed. You've done this before, and now when you see that ball coming, you do a behavior of catching the ball. Now, sometimes I would throw the ball again, and in midair I'd say, don't catch it, but you probably still catch it. And so this example, I would use to kind of illustrate that when you see the ball coming, since you were a child, you've learned that when something is coming towards you that is probably this shape or size, especially a ball, that you should catch it. Your behavior has been trained, in a sense. It's been shaped to catch that ball. In the same way, when your mind generates a problematic thought, a worried thought, a difficult thought, fusion is the human being's natural default setting. And we can explain why, because historically the mind has helped us through many, many problems. So here we're not trying to unlearn the reflex. What we're trying to do is getting better at discerning when the thought is useful and worth us fusing with and when the thought is not. I'll say that again. We're not trying to unlearn, we're trying to discern. And when it's not helpful, when we discern that it is not helpful to fuse with a thought, now we can do something else with this thought. And that's what defusion will provide us with, some exercises, some alternatives to do when we experience thoughts that are not helpful to fuse with. Now, there's a great metaphor I like here called the Wizard of Oz metaphor. And it's really about the mind. So far, maybe the way I've talked about the mind is kind of putting it in a bad light. And I think this has helped me to kind of express to clients that, it's not that the mind is out, negative. It's not out like trying to get you. It's not trying to harm you. And so in this analogy, the way that it goes is that, at the end of the Wizard of Oz, if anyone's seen the original, the wizard is there and they find him. And he's not this big scary thing that he's kind of portraying to be. He's just this sort of little guy. And he says, I'm not a bad guy. I'm just a horrible wizard. And in the same way, the mind is not a bad thing. It's not a bad instrument trying to keep you stuck in anxiety or trying to keep you depressed. It's not a bad advisor. It's just a horrible dictator. We put it in that position. We give it that authority. Don't know if that makes sense. The mind is not a horrible advisor. It's not a bad advisor. It's a horrible dictator. So when the mind is the dictator of behavior, that is a risky place to be because the mind isn't always reliable entirely. But as an advisor, as something we can kind of step back and sort of look at and consider and consider in light of our values, it's a completely different thing then. So this little analogy I think is important. There's another analogy which you might prefer, which is kind of the concept of imagining your life is a boardroom meeting. This is one that I came up with one day, and it's sort of imagine you sit at the chair of the board and you actually decide what happens next. And in that board, you've got two other characters. You've got your thoughts and emotions, let's say, in one character, and this character is kind of, very loyal, very helpful in the past, has protected you, has done a lot of things positive for you, and they always have an opinion. They tend to be kind of risk averse, and potentially sometimes they might tend to be risk seeking. Your character there might be different to someone else's, but then you've got another person in the boardroom who's your values, let's say, and your values sit there. And what I know about these two is that they're different personalities. The advisor, the one who sits there, your mind, often has a lot to say, whereas values tend to sit back and wait for your invitation to share their input. And so in this, given the dynamic between the two, sometimes we tend to automatically, almost like a reflex, like we're talking about here, implement whatever this character says, the loud one, the mind. And so this is the case for a lot of our lives, is that we kind of just go whatever the mind says. It's got our attention and it dominates what we do. Whereas what we're doing in ACT is in defusion, we're helping to sort of step back, recognize the difference between us and what our mind is saying, recognize our mind not as harmful, as potentially helpful and potentially unhelpful, but something that we can consider nonetheless in the light of our values. So you see fusion, defusion, and values coming together in just this little analogy.